When John Lennon was murdered in 1980, his two young sons were left to grow up in the shadow of both tragedy and greatness. Now, in 2025, Julian and Sean Lennon have built lives that both honor and escape the weight of their father's Beatles legacy. From music careers to personal ventures, each son has walked a different path while carrying the echoes of John's influence. But how do they balance their own identities with being forever tied to one of the most iconic names in music history? Julian Charles. John Lennon. Julian Lennon entered the world as John Charles Julian Lennon, a name that inevitably tied him to one of the most famous musicians in history. For decades, Julian lived with the weight of that identity, admired by some, scrutinized by others, and constantly compared to the father he lost at such a young age. Yet in 2020, nearly 6 decades into his life and career, he made a quiet but deeply meaningful change. He legally altered his name to Julian Charles John Lennon. Julian revealed the reasons behind this decision during an appearance on the Word in Your Ear podcast. For him, the adjustment wasn't a rejection of his heritage, but a practical step toward reclaiming a sense of autonomy. It was in 2020, just before we all got locked in a cage, that I finally actually decided to legally change my name by default, he explained. Because originally my name was John Charles Julian Lennon, and the crap that I had to deal with when traveling and security companies and this and that and the other. The issue stemmed from the way official documents and systems prioritized first names. For Julian, that meant he was constantly forced to present himself as John Lennon in situations such as airline boarding passes or hotel check-ins. Whenever you had to present yourself, especially on boarding passes, just as an example, you know they only use your first name, and so it would always be John Lennon, he recalled. The experience was not just inconvenient, but also emotionally taxing. Being recognized as John Lennon often invited unwanted attention, jokes, or awkward remarks from strangers who could not resist making references to the legendary Beatle. Over time, these moments created a low-level anxiety that Julian carried with him in public. I became quite fearful and anxious about those scenarios, because there would always be wisecracks or jokes, he admitted. For a man who had built his own career and identity as an artist, it was frustrating to constantly be reduced to a famous name he had inherited but never chosen. By flipping his given names, Julian placed his commonly used name first, allowing him to step into the world on his own terms, while still honoring the legacy of his father. Beyond the technicalities of identity, Julian has long lived in the shadow of a complicated family history. As a child, he was famously the inspiration for Paul McCartney's song Hey Jude, originally written as Hey Jules, to comfort him during his parents' divorce. John Lennon had left Julian's mother, Cynthia, for Yoko Ono, and the upheaval left scars on the young boy. The song became one of the Beatles' most enduring anthems, but for Julian, it carried a very personal meaning, an enduring reminder of the struggles he faced as a child. Decades later, Julian returned to that theme of resilience and reflection with his 2022 album Jude, a title deliberately chosen to reconnect with his past and reinterpret it on his own terms. Speaking with People, he explained that the record was not just a collection of songs, but a mirror into his own journey of self-discovery. It was very much reflective, looking in the mirror deeply and trying to find that place of peace, he said. I found it 1 or 2 times before, but it got lost in the muddle of life. Working on the album was about getting in touch with myself and who I am. For Julian Lennon, the son of Beatles legend John Lennon and Cynthia Lennon, the memories of his father are complicated and bittersweet. Though John was often distant during Julian's early childhood, immersed in music, fame, and his new life with Yoko Ono, father and son began to reconnect as Julian entered his teenage years. By the mid-1970s, there were signs of reconciliation. When John Lennon was murdered in 1980, his 2 young sons were left to grow up in the shadow of both tragedy, and the 2 began speaking more regularly on the phone, sharing music and moments that meant the world to Julian. In a revealing interview with his younger brother Sean on BBC Radio in 2020, Julian reflected on one of their final conversations before John's tragic death in December 1980. "Dad and I had been getting on and speaking a lot more on the phone, when I was sort of 15, 16, and 17, he recalled. At the time, Julian was living in North Wales after spending time away in boarding school. "I just remember I was living at Mom's house and I was finishing up at school," he explained. It was during this period that John shared with Julian a piece of music that would soon carry haunting significance. Over the phone, he played him a freshly mixed version of Just Like Starting Over, one of the standout tracks from his final album, Double Fantasy. "I remember him playing Starting Over the phone, he just mixed it," Julian said. "I just remember that as being the last kind of moments, listening to him being extremely happy, in a happy place, and doing what he loved." For Julian, those phone calls were more than casual exchanges. They were glimpses of a father finally finding peace, both in his personal life and his music. He remembered not only Starting Over, but also some of the other tracks John was working on at the time. "The music that he played me at that particular point, Starting Over and some of the other album tracks, I was very happy for him and looking forward to seeing him again. Anyway, in another dimension," Julian trailed off, acknowledging the cruel interruption of fate that prevented that reunion. The poignancy of that memory has stayed with Julian, shaping both his outlook on life and his creative journey. Like his father, Julian pursued a career in music, releasing a series of albums beginning with his acclaimed debut, Velotte, in 1984. But unlike John, Julian's artistic interests have stretched beyond the recording studio, encompassing film, photography, and literature. His projects reveal not only his passion for creativity, but also his desire to use his platform for positive impact. In 2017, Julian added another dimension to his legacy when he released Touch the Earth, the first in a trilogy of children's books designed to foster eco-awareness and inspire young readers to care for the planet. The book takes children on a magical adventure around the globe aboard a white feather flyer, a symbolic nod to Julian's connection with his father. John had once told him that if he ever passed on, he would let Julian know he was still with him through a white feather. That sign later appeared in Julian's life, inspiring not only his charitable work through the White Feather Foundation, but also the imaginative vessel at the heart of his children's series. Speaking to people about the purpose of the books, Julian explained, "I would hope that these books would serve as a gentle reminder of how beautiful the world we live in is, as well as the problems we face on a daily basis. And also, I hope it would nurture the relationship between parent and child, and prompt discussion about life and love, too." For him, Touch the Earth and its sequels are not only educational tools, but also emotional bridges, opportunities for parents and children to share meaningful conversations, just as he cherished in those fleeting final calls with his own father. Julian's dedication to the environment and humanitarian causes extends far beyond the written page. Through the White Feather Foundation, he has supported projects focused on clean water, health, education, and the preservation of indigenous cultures. His photography has been exhibited around the world, often highlighting environmental themes, while his documentaries and film projects amplify global stories of resilience and change. Yet despite all of these accomplishments, the shadow of John Lennon inevitably looms large. Julian has never shied away from acknowledging the difficulties of growing up as the son of a cultural icon, nor the pain of losing him before they had fully healed their relationship. But through his art, his activism, and his storytelling, Julian has found ways to transform that pain into something meaningful. The memory of hearing Starting Over the phone, a moment filled with happiness, promise, and anticipation, remains a defining chapter in Julian's life. It was the sound of a father and son finally reconnecting, a bond tragically cut short, but never forgotten. Through his music, his writing, and his foundation, Julian has carried that spirit forward, ensuring that his own legacy is not only tied to his father's, but also distinctly his own. Sean Taro Ono Lennon. The arrival of Sean was more than just a personal milestone for John and Yoko Ono. It marked a new chapter in John's life. Following Sean's birth, John famously stepped away from the public spotlight for 5 years, choosing to dedicate himself to fatherhood and domestic life before returning to music with Double Fantasy in 1980. That period gave Sean a childhood grounded not only in fame, but also in the deep love of parents determined to protect and nurture him. Sean's early years unfolded in the artistic heart of New York, where he grew up surrounded by creativity and culture. One of the most defining aspects of his upbringing was his relationship with his neighbor, the legendary singer Roberta Flack, who lived next door. Their bond became a lifelong friendship, one Sean later celebrated in Roberta, a documentary about her life. Reflecting on those days, Sean shared, "I was very blessed that I grew up with the coolest neighbor in the world." At first, I didn't even think of Roberta as this incredible artist and musician. She was just this really cool neighbor. We used to call her Aunt Roberta, and we were very close. That closeness exemplifies the unusual but charmed environment Sean experienced as a child, surrounded by musical giants but able to see them as ordinary people within his circle. This grounding shaped the way he later navigated fame and creativity, seeking authenticity in his relationships and his art. Like his father and his older half-brother Julian, Sean developed into a talented and multifaceted musician. Over the years, he has released 4 solo albums, collaborated on 5 projects with Yoko Ono, and co-founded the psychedelic rock group the Claypool-Lennon Delirium with Primus bassist Les Claypool. With the band, Sean embraced experimental and surreal soundscapes, allowing him to carve out a niche far removed from the expectations attached to his family name. His creativity extended into the role of producer as well, most notably contributing to Lana Del Rey's 2017 album Lust for Life, which received critical acclaim. Despite his success, Sean has often admitted that his motivation for pursuing music was deeply personal, rooted in grief and longing for the father he lost when he was just 5 years old. In a candid interview with People in November 2024, he explained, "I never played music because I was good at it. I lost my father and I didn't know how to fill that void. Learning how to play his songs on guitar was a way to process the loss with an activity that made me feel connected to him." For Sean, music became not just a profession, but a form of therapy, a bridge to the man whose absence defined so much of his life. When you've lost a parent, things like that motivate you, because you're trying to find them. Making music always made me feel like I was getting to know him better, he reflected. In his artistry, Sean isn't just carrying on the Lennon name. He is continuously searching for a connection to the father who left too soon. A key pillar of Sean's life has been his relationship with his half-brother, Julian Lennon, who is 12 years older. Despite the age gap and the complicated family history that could have created distance, the brothers share an unusually close bond. In fact, Julian has often described Sean as his best mate. Their closeness was made visible in 2021 when they attended a screening of The Beatles' Get Back Together. Julian admitted he was initially hesitant about revisiting that history. "I was like, I don't need to do that," he recalled. But Sean was adamant and felt committed, and we were both in LA, so I said, "Listen, I'll go with you. Let's go together. Let's go as a team." And it was great to do that. Moments like these underscore the strength of their relationship, which has become a source of stability for both men as they navigate the complex legacy of being John Lennon's sons. Speaking warmly of Sean, Julian once said, "We're brothers, and we love each other deeply on that level. We just talk daily, same as anybody would." In an industry often marked by rivalry and fractured relationships, their bond is both rare and heartening. In 2020, Sean Lennon stepped into a role that few could carry with such grace and sensitivity, hosting a special BBC radio show to commemorate what would have been his father John Lennon's 80th birthday. The program was not only a celebration of John's life and music, but also an intimate reflection on the personal legacy he left behind for his youngest son. The event gathered voices from across John's world, family, collaborators, and lifelong friends. Paul McCartney joined the broadcast, reminiscing about the early days of the Beatles and reflecting on the enduring impact of his songwriting partner. Elton John, another of John's close companions, also participated, sharing stories of laughter, creativity, and the bond they shared both on stage and off. For listeners, the show became a moving intersection of history and emotion, connecting the legendary figure of John Lennon with the private, tender memories of those who knew him best. For Sean, the experience was both an honor and an emotional challenge. He admitted openly that revisiting his father's music, especially certain tracks, still carried an immense weight. "I honestly do worry about crying because sometimes I think when I talk about certain songs that Dad wrote, they're just so emotional," he revealed during the broadcast. He went on to explain that songs from the later years, particularly those surrounding the double fantasy sessions, are the hardest to face. "They are hard for me to even think about, let alone listen to some of them, especially the later stuff, just because I have so many memories of them, making double fantasy, and some of that stuff just breaks my heart because it's like a time machine. It takes me right back to those moments before his death." That raw vulnerability underscored what many fans already knew. For Sean, his father's legacy isn't just cultural, it's deeply personal. John Lennon's songs, celebrated across the globe, are also fragments of family history, moments frozen in time that Sean still feels when he presses play. For him, music is not only a profession, but a living dialogue with his father, one that continues to shape his perspective and identity decades after John's passing. While Sean's connection to his father's work remains profound, his own career has been equally diverse and adventurous. A gifted multi-instrumentalist and songwriter, Sean has built a body of work that refuses to be confined by expectations. He has released solo albums, collaborated with Yoko Ono on avant-garde projects, and explored psychedelic rock with Les Claypool in their band, the Claypool-Lennon Delirium. Yet one of the most significant creative partnerships of his life has been with Charlotte Kemp Moule, his longtime partner both in life and in art. Sean first met Charlotte, better known professionally as Kemp Moule, at Coachella in 2005. At the time, Kemp was already an accomplished model, but her artistic talents stretched far beyond fashion. The two connected instantly, not just romantically, but creatively, discovering a shared love of experimental sounds and a desire to build something collaborative. By 2007, they were in a committed relationship, one that would evolve into a dynamic artistic partnership. Together, they formed the band The Ghost of a Saber-Toothed Tiger, often shortened to GOASTT, a project that allowed them to blend elements of folk, psychedelia, and indie rock with playful surrealism. Their music was both whimsical and deeply textured, with Sean's multi-instrumental abilities complementing Kemp's songwriting and ethereal vocals. The duo toured widely, gaining a loyal following that appreciated their refusal to chase mainstream formulas, instead reveling in the freedom of artistic experimentation. For Sean, working with Kemp has been more than just collaboration. It has been a stabilizing and inspiring force in his life. Their relationship, now spanning well over a decade, is a testament to the balance he has found between honoring his past and building his own future. While the Lennon name inevitably draws attention, their work together is proof that Sean is not simply carrying on a legacy, but actively forging one of his own. Their bond also illustrates how Sean has learned to navigate life in the public eye. Whereas his childhood was shaped by the overwhelming loss of his father and the weight of expectation, his adulthood has been marked by creativity, partnership, and resilience. Whether producing music for other artists, experimenting with genre-defying projects, or hosting tributes to his father, Sean moves fluidly between the roles of custodian of legacy and innovator of new ideas. The 2020 radio program ultimately symbolized both of those roles. It allowed Sean to bring together the voices of those who knew John best, providing fans with a rare chance to hear deeply personal stories. At the same time, it revealed Sean's own courage in confronting painful memories and sharing them with the world. In his reflections on time machine songs like those on Double Fantasy, listeners heard not only the grief of a son, but also the love, admiration, and sense of connection that music still provides him. Now in his late 40s, Sean Lennon embodies a rare combination: the weight of history and the spirit of independence. He remains a son who still feels his father's absence profoundly, but also an artist who has learned to use that absence as fuel for creation. With Kemp Moole at his side, Sean continues to make music that is both personal and boundary-pushing, ensuring that his story is not merely an extension of his father's, but an evolving journey in its own right. What do you think about John Lennon's two children? Leave us your comments in the section below. We hope you have found this helpful video. Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you like it. Thank you for watching this, and see you in the next videos. Goodbye.